Alright guys, so by this point you guys are already very good at animating. You understand how the value graph, the speed graph, and how animating works inside of After Effects, and you've also practiced overlapping animations and creating animations inside of After Effects. For that reason, we're going to take one more extended masterclass on realism, and I want to cover everything that has to do with realism all the way from the basics to make you an expert at creating realistic animations inside of After Effects. This is basically going to cover everything that has to do with realism when it comes to motion design and motion graphics in After Effects. Today, we're covering one simple concept which is really going to help us understand how realism works in animations. And this simple concept is called squash and stretch. So as you guys can see on the screen over here, I've got an image of what the squash and stretch concept is. What basically is the squash and stretch concept? This concept basically is what I call the velocity concept. Whenever an object moves inside of, like, let's say you're animating something inside of After Effects, whenever an object moves at a different speed, the faster it goes, the more elongated it becomes. And this applies to everything. And if we apply this effect inside of After Effects, it makes our animation look so much more realistic. So instead of a ball just naturally bouncing and looking like an image of a ball bouncing, we can actually bring it some life, we can bring it some physics and make it look super realistic. So what are we going to be doing today? Today we're going to be learning how the squash and stretch concept works. It's a very simple concept. We're also going to be applying this to both a rectangle, we're going to be applying this to both a rectangle that's going to be moving at a speed, and we're also going to be applying this to a ball that's going to be bouncing, and by the end of this we're going to create a ball bouncing animation. So here's how we're going to learn this. Okay, we're first going to make a rectangle that's going to move on the screen, and we're going to apply the squash and stretch effect to it. Then we're going to make a ball that's bouncing up and down, and we're also going to learn it on that. Finally, to wrap up all of the squash and stretch concept, we're going to be making a ball bouncing sideways from the left side to the right side to learn how to make the ball bouncing effect. And we're going to cover this in this long masterclass, and it's going to help us become much better at making realistic animations inside of After Effects. Okay, so this being said, let's dive right in. I'm over here inside of After Effects in my same project file, which I had earlier on. So you guys obviously know how to make all of these super cool animations and create some very cool realistic animations. I'm going to go ahead and delete them, and I'm only going to stick with my gray background. That being said, let's get to work on our rectangle animation. The first animation I want a rectangle just moving from the left side to the right side, okay? And based on this, we're going to start building up the squash and stretch concept, okay? Based on that rectangle moving from the left side to the right side, I'm going to start showing you guys how stretching it and squashing it, and at what point, and how we actually do that with keyframes, how that all plays together to make it look much more realistic. Let's go ahead and get started. So first, I'm going to right click and add in a new shape layer. All right. Now, once we've got a new shape layer, we're going to select our rectangle tool, and we're just going to draw out a nice and simple rectangle here. Now, obviously, I'm going to go down and delete the stroke because I don't like the stroke. We're going to go to the fill and just make it this light gray. And I'm just going to leave it as it is right now. This is good, okay? Now let's click on P to start animating our position. Let's move back, keyframe the current position, and just move it over to the left side. Let's go ahead and start it over here. Then we're going to move over to the 1 second mark, and we're just going to move it to the right side, okay? That's all we're going to be doing. So now all it's doing is it's moving from left to right. Let's do it 2 seconds long. Nope, 2 seconds is too slow. Let's go from left to right in 1 second. That's very good. Now this is a robotic animation. So how do we take this a step further? How do we make this better? We select it, we go into our graph editor, and if we want to, we can use our value graph. Instead, I'm going to be using the speed graph, which is just going to be way better for this. Then we're going to be using the value graph to learn a bit more. Okay, so let's start with the speed graph. I want it to start quick and then slow down. So let's go ahead and do that. Actually, I want it to start slow and then quick and then slow. Okay, so we're going to drop this slider to the bottom. Like so, drop this slider to the bottom, or we could just select both of them and click on F9, and that's automatically going to do that for us. And then we're just going to move this thing back, and we're going to move this thing back until we have a spike in the middle like this. So it starts and then speeds up. I'm going to make that spike a bit faster, like that. All right, and we're going to make sure we're doing this without any motion blur, okay, just for this specific animation. So all that we have is this nice and simple movement animation. Now, how do we use the squash and stretch tool? Well, if we look at balls when they are animated, for example, in Disney, if you guys have ever watched Disney movies, when you see a ball bouncing, there's a few more, and like that Pixar intro, there's a few more animations that are added on top of each other instead of just a basic movement animation. Whenever people want to make very advanced motion design, they always do something which is the squash and stretch, which is where they extend the object based on direction it's moving. Meaning if I throw a ball, realistic, if I was filming this in slow-mo and I threw a ball at full speed, you will see it mid-air evolve more into an oval shape, because the forces on the extremities are too harsh. They're pulling it in opposite directions. So for that reason, when it comes to us animating things inside of After Effects, we do the exact same thing. Whenever we're moving something at the peak of its speed, you guys will notice, we're going to stretch it out. And when it slows down, we're going to shrink it back down. And that's basically the idea of the squash and stretch. At the peak of the movement, or where the movement is the fastest, we're going to stretch out the object. And when it slows down, we're going to shrink it back, and it's going to make it look more realistic. As I always say, experience teaches better than information. So let's go ahead and learn this with experience. Here's how we do this. We're going to click on S and we're going to unlink the scale. What does this allow us to do? Well, when the scale is linked, if I want to change the scale, everything has to change together. If I unlink it, I can change the horizontal and the vertical values alone. Okay. Now let's go ahead and do this. We're going to do this with a rectangle. It's not going to look very good, but it's going to allow us to really understand how to make it work. And then I'm going to try it with a circle and you guys will really notice the difference. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to add a keyframe to the scale. Now, when I do this, I have a keyframe for the scale and the position. I can click on U and we could go ahead and see both position and scale keyframes. Now, this being said, let's just analyze this movement a little bit more. So right now it's pretty slow, right? It's slow, it's slow, it's slow. And then it's fast right here in the middle. And then it slows down again. So notice the small points and the small intervals over here on the line, right? Every single few frames, notice how right here is very close. So there's barely any distance being covered. And then over here, it's very fast. There's a lot of distance being covered. And then here it slows back down. What does this mean? This means that over here, it should start regular. As it speeds up, it should extend. It should be longer at this point. And then over here, it should contract back again. So how do we do this? Well, I'll show you guys exactly how we do this. First, we keyframe a keyframe for the scale right here. Now, since we want it over here right at the center to kind of extend, we basically just go to the point where we want it to extend and we just extend it like so. We extend however much we want. Now, I don't suggest extending it too much, so I'm going to just go for 120. Now, we're just going to move forward and go to the point where it, comes back to its regular position, and we're just going to go back to 100 for now, right? Later we're going to change this. But what does this do? This basically tells After Effects that at the beginning my scale is regular. Now once it's sped up in the middle, it's going to extend, and once it slows back down, it's going to retract. Problem is, if we take these into our speed graph, we'll notice a few things. Our position spikes up in the middle, whereas our scale, let's make sure we're editing the speed graph. Our scale start at 0, starts slow, and then increases, right? It's instantly robotically increasing and then slows back down robotically. So there's no buildup of the scale with the motion, meaning our motion is going quickly and then the scale is just animating on its own. Like our motion is slowly building up and the scale is already big. That's not realistic. How do we make this realistic? We select these first keyframes and we need to make it just like the position. So here's how we do it. We select the scale, we click on F9, and we smoothen out the entry. Since our movement is smooth at the beginning, we want the scale to be smooth at the entry. So I smoothen out this slider here, and over here on this edge, I could just bring this thing back. This way it's going to slowly extend itself as speed comes up. And the same thing for the exit. We're going to start it quick and then slow it back down. So we move this back. Whoops, let's make sure we're selecting the right ones. Move this back like so, and just move this back until they are both like fluid. We want both of them to be kind of flowy. We don't want any kind of jittery motion here. We don't want any kind of weird curves. Check that out. And there we go. That is the squash and stretch. And check out just how much better this looks, right? So this is it without it. A nice and basic animation. And this is it with it. It's just much more realistic. Now, an extra thing that you could do is, because at the center over here, it's going faster, right? It's nice and logical. At the end, what you could do is you can actually shrink it back down. So instead of it being 100, you can actually bring it back down to 80 like this. And that's a bit more realistic. Now it's going to change shape, obviously, but it's even more realistic to have it as it's slowing down, kind of shrink back down, but then at the end, extend back to 100. That, I think, is the most realistic way of doing it. Probably place this thing here. Yeah, and these two would need to be animated. But this being said, we're not going to use that on the rectangle. I just want to use the rectangle to explain how we do the squash and stretch. Now check this out. We're going to apply this to a circle, and you guys are going to notice a huge difference. Check it out, okay? We're going to go ahead and delete the shape layer. We're going to add in a new shape layer. Let's go ahead and select our ellipse tool, hold down shift, and just draw out a quick ellipse right here in the center. Let's go down and delete that stroke, open up the fill, go for a lightish gray fill, and that's good to go. Let's go ahead and click on P for position. Let's go ahead and animate the same exact animation. And you guys will notice a big difference, okay? So let's keyframe the position. Let's move it over to here. And you know what? I'm actually gonna have this one start over here at the bottom. I'm gonna have two side by side to show them to you guys, okay? Let's start it here. Then let's move 1 second over to here. And then let's just move it to the end of the screen like this. What do we have? We have a nice and quick animation, okay? So we're basically gonna do the same exact thing. We're just gonna duplicate it in a bit and then do the same exact thing, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So let's go and select this thing, F9, and then we're just going to start it quick and then slow it down inside the speed graph. Or actually, let's just do the same spike animation just for now, okay? And we'll do the start quick and slow down in a bit. So this is our spike animation, like so, nice and simple. And we're also going to duplicate it. And for this one, since I'm not going to be using the scale, I'll use my anchor point to lift it to the top. Okay, just clicked on A to bring up the anchor point and lift it to the top. Awesome. Okay, so we just have two side-by-side animations. Now let's go and select this basic one and do our squash and stretch. As you guys can see, when I click on the path, you guys can notice in the beginning, it moves slow. In the middle, it's covering a lot of points quickly, and at the end, it moves slow. It slows down again. Let's click on S and start it here, and click on U to see both our keyframes. Now, with our first scale keyframe over here, let's move over to the center a little bit, and at the center, we definitely need it to extend. So let's unlink this, and let's extend it overly like so. Let's go ahead and do 130 for this one. And then at the end, as it's slowing down, we want it to go back to 100. So let's go ahead and bring it back to 100. What we have so far is the squash and stretch, but it does not look realistic. Let's select it. Remember, our movement spikes in the middle, so we want the peak of these to be in the middle. So we're going to select both of these and F9. And that should actually be pretty good. We just need to extend the first keyframe. Let's make sure we all select the first one and extend that back keyframe again. And there we go. Now check out the difference between the top one and the bottom one. Just tell me which one looks more realistic. Right? You can instantly tell a difference. Now, one more thing you could do, since we've already added the keyframe for the scale over here in the beginning, I'm going to go to the center one. And as it's getting faster, you can't just have it get longer. You also need to kind of shrink it down vertically. And this is another trick people do. So I'm going to go ahead and set this thing to something like 80. And you guys will see this for yourself. It's going to look so good. Check it out. So now we have the green scale, which is for our vertical scale. We also are going to need to select that and make sure that it starts quick and then starts slow and then speeds up. So what did we just do? We basically just keyframed the beginning of the horizontal scale right here at 100 and the vertical scale. At the middle, we just made it longer and shorter, and at the end we shrunk it back down. And inside the speed graph, we made sure both of them start slow and peak up in the middle. And check that out. Look at how much nicer that looks. And then if we even enable motion blur on both of these, like, one of them looks so realistic, while the other is just a moving ball. One of them looks so realistic. So if you guys want to make realistic animations, this is the secret, okay? This is how it's done. So let's go ahead and practice this on a bouncing ball. This is what's really going to push our limits, okay? So what I want you guys to do here is, because you're probably not going to know how to do this instantly, I want you to just follow what I'm doing, okay? And as we do this, you're going to get the hang of it. You're going to do it with me for one repetition, and then we're going to just do it over and over and over again until you guys kind of get the hang of it. And then finally, we're going to incorporate it in our bouncing ball sideways, which you guys are going to learn on your own. Okay, so I'm going to add a quick shape layer, and I'm going to create a floor. Okay, I'm just going to click on my pen tool, click on a point over here, and hold down shift and the point on the right side. That creates a line. Okay, I think that's a good line. That's nice and simple. Okay, we can always go down to our contents, our shape, and our stroke, and we could tone it down if we don't like it. I'm going to go with 7 just because that's good. Let's go ahead and add in a ball and start animating. So I'm going to add in a shape layer, select my ellipse tool over here, hold down shift, and draw a ball right here at the center. Let's make sure that the anchor point's at the center. This is very important. Let's go down, delete that stroke, go to that fill, and make it a light gray. Awesome. Let's go ahead and animate it bouncing. So how exactly are we going to do this? First of all, let's scale this thing down to like 80. I think that's better. Let's scale it down to 80. I think that's better. First, let's animate the bounce. When a ball bounces, it starts pretty high, and as it bounces, it doesn't bounce back up to the same position. It bounces back up somewhere slightly lower than the original position. So what we want to do is we want to animate it starting in the top, and then we want to end it at the bottom, and we want it to go back to the top, go back to the bottom, back to the top, back again and again and again. So how do we do this? Let's first think of the start. First, we're animating the position. So let's click on P for position, and let's add a keyframe. And let's think of the start, right? Let's start this ball up here. Nice and simple, right? Let's go ahead and see how we're going to time this. So within 1 second, I think bouncing it down to the ground is pretty good. So I'm going to bounce it down until the edge touches the edge of this layer, right? That's nice and simple. Okay, so far we've got it moving down like this. It's a pretty slow bounce. So instead, I'm actually going to, you know what? Let's leave it on 1 second. We'll change this when we want to. Then I'm going to go to 2 seconds. And if I click on my shape layer, I can see where it came down. I'm going to bring it back up. Am I going to bring it back up to the same position? No, I'm going to bring it back down slightly lower because this is how a realistic bounce works. Okay. Now, once it's over here at 3 seconds, let's bring it back down to the same exact position. Once again, right here on the edge. And then at 4 seconds, we're going to bring it back up to half of this original position. And at 5 seconds, we're going to bounce it again. And at 6 seconds, we're going to bring it back up to this position. And at 7 seconds, we're just going to have it bounce back here and just stop. Okay? So if we watch this through, we have a bounce, bounce, a bounce, another bounce, and another bounce. This being said, let's make this more realistic. This looks very robotic. The first thing we could do by making this realistic, again, this is really going to challenge you guys. But first, let's work on the movement, and then we'll work on the velocity. So first up, this movement over here is okay, but the bounce definitely needs to be slightly faster, right? I think the bounce needs to be slightly faster. So we go down. I think this bounce needs to be faster because we're covering less distance, okay? Now this distance over here should be the same because now we're covering this distance and we're covering it again. So it makes sense. So bam, it bounces, and then we go back up to this position, which we should obviously do that slightly faster. Bam. Like so, and then we should bring this thing closer as well, so it's slightly faster. So we got bounce, 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 and then we have another final bounce, bam, and then we finally die it off over here. I'm just doing this based off of how it feels. I think we should just go slightly faster, so the bounce starts slower and then slowly speeds up as we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this thing closer, and this thing closer, and this thing closer. And let's just go ahead and just watch see how this is. If it's too fast, we could always slow it down. Yeah, I think this is good. This is pretty realistic. Now, the problem is, in a real life situation, the ball starts slow and ends fast. And on the bounce, it starts fast and ends slow. So when you drop a ball, it starts slow, it starts picking up speed, and then it bounces. At the point, like the moment where it's bouncing, it bounces back up just as fast, very, very quickly, right? It bounces back up very quickly and then slows down in the air, and then again and again and again. So how do we do that with the speed graph? It's very nice and simple. Let's go ahead and go in here. We could actually do this with the value graph. It's just way better. So all that we got to do is we basically now have a vertical position. So we're going to select all of these, and we're going to click on F9 so we get our sliders. We didn't get the sliders, so I'm going to select them, separate these dimensions, select all of them, and click on F9. Awesome. I want it to start slow and then end fast. So for that reason, I'm bringing the slider back, making sure I'm only selecting it, but bringing this slider back as well. What's going to happen now? What's basically going to happen is this thing is going to start slow and build up to the bounce like this. Bam. Nice and simple. Now what I also need there to happen is the bounce needs to be a spike like that. Boom, there we go. That's much more realistic. It starts slow and then speeds up. Now the thing is, when it bounces back up, I also need the same thing. So we have a keyframe here saying the Y position's at the base, and a keyframe saying back up. So it's going to start quickly. So we're going to bring this thing back like this, and we're going to bring this thing back so it ends slow. So we have a peak at the bounce right here. So this is the moment where it bounces. These two frames are the fastest. So bam, like that. That is a more realistic bounce. Let's go ahead and do you guys like understand that, right? It's nice and simple. It starts slow, the moment starts slow, and then the moment it bounces, it's kind of bouncing quickly and it's bouncing back up relatively quickly as well. Nice and simple. Let's go ahead and do this one more time over here. So we're going to select this. We're going to shrink this back. We're going to start this thing slow as well. Okay. And then once again, we need to end this thing quickly. and end this thing slow like that. So there's always a peak at the bounce, okay? Just like this. Same exact thing is going to happen here. Start slow, peak at the bounce, and the same thing here. End slow, peak at the bounce. Bam, like so. Bam. And then finally at the end, it's going to start slow and also end relatively slow as well. And there we go. If you watch through this, we have a bounce and a bounce and a bounce and a bounce. It makes so much more sense, right? The ball is falling slowly from the top, and the higher we go, the more it's going to slow down because there's gravity. We need to animate gravity. So it's going to start slow from the top, and so the moment it hits, it has to go fast, right? So this makes total sense. Now, this being said, we have a nice and simple animation here. And if we turned on our motion blur, it looks pretty realistic, right? Nice and cool. Now, this looks okay, but we can make this way better. Let's get started on making our squash and stretch. Remember, as it goes faster, it needs to speed up. When it hits an object, it has to squash because that movement, it's almost like a jelly. That movement is now extending over that entire ball. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Okay, let's click on S to bring up our scale and keyframe it and unlink it. Let's click on U to see all our keyframes. I'm going to start this at a regular like scale like this. Then I know it ends right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to have it all the way up to this point right here, halfway through the motion, like so. Once again, the peak is at the end. Right before the peak, we're going to have it just extend horizontally. So we're going to increase the vertical scale to something like, let's do 100. So it increases up to 100. And here's the thing. The moment it hits the ground, I need it to go back to 100 over here, but I also needed to do another thing. So I needed to go back to its original scale, which is 80, but I also needed to extend sideways to emphasize that bounce. Okay, so basically what's happening here is that as it's dropping vertically, it increases in scale. As it hits the ground, it increases in horizontal scale. And as it bounces back up, it's going up quickly again. That horizontal scale no longer needs to be there. Instead, we can bring that horizontal scale back to 100, and we can bring that, back to 80, and we can bring that vertical scale back up one more time. So check out what's happening. It's going down, it has to elongate for the speed. It bounces, it has to elongate horizontally, and it has to go back vertically again for the speed. Hopefully that makes total sense. Now, one key thing to remember is, okay, this can look a bit confusing, so we could just use the speed graph if we want. One key thing to remember is, let's see, can we do that? Okay, we can't. Yeah. One key thing to remember is that the peak of the movement is right at the bounce. So for that reason, we need everything to spike at the bounce. So here's exactly how we're going to do this. So what is this basically like? What does this confusing frame tell me? Well, at 0, nothing is happening. And then it animates its way up to 100 over here. And then the 100, like the green is obviously our vertical, animates back down. And then back up again. We're looking at the speed graph, right? Let's look at the value graph so this can make sense. It goes 0. On the first bounce, the horizontal is 100. The vertical is still 80. On the second bounce, the vertical is back to 80 and the horizontal is 100. And on the third bounce, the vertical is back at 100 and the horizontal is back to 80. So it's always inverse. Let's go ahead and make this much more realistic. Let's go and click on F9. We're going to get our sliders. Let's select our first one. Let's make sure that the peak is over here. F9 on this thing as well. Let's just have it start slow. Oops, that's our horizontal one. Just have it start slow and peak right there. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Make sure it peaks and then ends slow. And then make sure the same thing over here, right? End slow and then peak at the bounce. Because remember, down here, it's supposed to be slow, right? Up here, it's supposed to be quick. So, bam, and there we go. What's basically happening now is as this keyframe is getting closer to the place where it's going to be elongated, we're obviously making sure that it is faster. It elongates faster once it gets really close. Now, we can actually do this even more because, to be honest, this isn't that big of an effect. I think it's this one here. Awesome. Bam. Okay, that's a bit more unrealistic. So, boom. You guys notice something, right? my ball starts becoming flat before it hits the surface, which is not something I want. So I'm going to keep this thing, I'm going to move this frame back up to this point, up until it hits the surface, which is right here. Bam. I think that's much more realistic, okay? This way it only starts converging, it only starts becoming horizontally wider once it hits the surface, and then we do that one more time. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for this one. Make sure that the peak is fast and the end is slow, because that's the best way to do it with a bounce, okay? Like that. Bam. There we go. Nice and simple. Let's go and do this for the rest, okay? So right here, the scale ends where it's vertically long, which means it's fast. Once it gets to the peak, obviously, vertically, it's no longer fast, so this thing has to go back down to 80. Now, it's going to start dropping back down. Once it's at the peak, actually, it slows down a little bit, so we can actually make the horizontal scale a bit bigger, because obviously, you know, it's going up and then slowing down, so it can elongate a bit more. Now, it's going to start going back down. So this thing can be up here. Now, it's going to start going back down. At this moment right here, I obviously want it to do a few things. Obviously down here, I'm going to want it to be a bit longer. So let's go 100 and then let's go thinner, 80. Yep. And then we're going to move forward. And once it hits, we obviously want it to go back down to 80 and just extend sideways up to 100. And then once it goes back up, we're going to want it to shrink back down to 80 horizontally and back up vertically so that it looks even faster. Okay, we're going to do this thing for the whole thing. So right up here, we can basically shrink this thing down to 80 and make it slightly longer since it's a peak. Now, once it slows down, obviously it's going to be less long with the movement. So I'm just going to keep like decreasing this. And then we're going back down. Like over here, it doesn't have enough time to pick up so much speed, but sure, we'll elongate it a little bit. And then over here, we're going to shrink this down to 80 and extend this slightly. And let's see. Then we could just move forward, have it bounce a little bit. Okay, so move forward over to here. And then just bring this thing down to 80. Okay, let's make this vertically just slightly big. And then this is it. This is the last one. And then over here, it's going to just become 80 again. And that's it. That's basically it. Okay, so let's go ahead and select all of these and bring these into the speed graph. And yes, it looks crazy, but again, this is good training for us. Okay, so first up, this bounce is correct. Now, let's move into the second bounce. This one starts quick and then slows down. That's not what we want. We want to make sure it starts like this, very quick, and then slows down over here. That's what we want, right? Like that. That's much better. Let's go ahead and focus on the green one for now. Then for here, we're going to want it to start slow and then end quick. Like that. Bam, there we go. This thing ends quick and then over here like quickens up as well. So we're going to slow down this edge and make sure that this edge gets the quick part. This one as well has to be quick. This one over here has to be slow. Like that. This one over here has to be slow. This one over here has to be quick on the bounce. Bam, just like that. And then obviously this one is slow. And this one over here is quick. There we go. Awesome. Let's go ahead and just focus on the vertical, right? So how much it's extending like this. Bam, that's good. Bam, bam, bam. Looks good. Okay, now let's go ahead and do the horizontal. So the horizontal over here ends up slow. That's cool. Over here, it's supposed to be fast, right? So we're going to shrink this down. Remember, when the vertical is slow, the horizontal is supposed to be fast. Okay, that's way better, I think. Yeah, way better. Once again, here it's supposed to be slow. And then on this edge, it's supposed to be fast. So I'm going to leave it over here. Then over here, it's supposed to be slow again. So I'm going to shrink this thing back down again. And over here, slow as well. And over here, fast. Let's slow this thing down like that. There we go. And once again, over here, shrink this thing down. Extend this thing like so. And then same thing over here. Shrink this down. And then simply extend this like so. And there we go. And now if we watch this, guys, there we go. We have a much more realistic bounce. Nice and cool. Awesome. If we want to basically tie this all together with a very, very nice animation, we can even animate the ball moving sideways, okay? Now check this. If we click on P and we look at our position animations, all of this thing starts at the same place, right? And bounces up and down. So all that we're animating is the Y position. Since these are separate dimensions, I can change the X value without anything else being affected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my first keyframe here and move the X value all the way to the left, and then go to my last keyframe and end it over here on the right. Now that's not going to work because we have keyframes in the middle. So what we could do is we could delete all of these because we don't need the X values, right? Since this is all just a bounce on the Y axis, and we could simply animate it moving to the right side. And we literally don't need to change anything because the bounce already looks realistic. There we go. And we're just going to extend this a bit longer. Like that. Check this out. Boom, boom, boom. Nice and simple. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you make a bouncing ball. We're not going to take anything more complex than this. We can make this even more realistic by adding more rotations, by adding elements which rotate, make it look like it's rolling, by slowing down the movement, so on and so forth. But this is going to be way more than enough to make sure that you guys are amazing animators. So if you guys understand the squash and stretch tool now, and you guys finally understand how to animate these, that's basically all I want from you guys. That's all that you need to know. From now on, you guys understand everything that has to do with animating inside of After Effects, how to use the value graph and the speed graph. Now it's just about exploring how you can use this with different shape layers and different effects to get different cool visuals. So this being said, we're going to move into our next session. In our next session, we're going to have an actionable step. This actionable step is going to tie everything that we just learned together and make sure we wrap up everything in one very good actionable step. And we're going to do this to make sure that we understand all of these and we have really grasped all of the knowledge. So this being said, if you feel like you don't really understand anything, feel free to go back and watch the specific course about it. And if you feel like everything is good, go ahead and move into the actionable step. Let's do this together and let's go ahead and move on from animating to stylizing in the next big masterclass. So let's dive right into actionable step 1.